Well, thank you, David. So this panel will require some specialized knowledge. Raise your hand if you've heard of artificial intelligence, also known as AI. Okay, I think we're going to be fine. So thank you for joining us for this panel, which I think is going to be great. We have some real experts in the development of projects and policy around energy and AI, and we're going to talk through some of the solutions that are available to achieve AI dominance while making sure that energy remains affordable and reliable. Rich Powell, CEO of Clean Energy Buyers Association, after a decade or two of largely stagnant electricity growth, load growth is now projected to surge. At the same time, energy affordability is quickly becoming one of the leading issues in DC and around the nation. So is AI the culprit? Is it the solution? How much should growing prices be blamed on data centers? What are the policies needed to safeguard electricity affordability and reliability moving forward?
Well, there's a lot there. So first, let me say thank you, Kyle, for doing this and bringing us together. A huge thank you to the C3 team for convening this fantastic series of conversations on these topics. Just very quickly, Clean Energy Buyers Association, we are the voice of the energy buying community in the United States and increasingly around the world. And we do have all of the hyperscale data center operators and many of their co-location partners in our membership. So we're very deeply engaged in this conversation. So for those of you that haven't been tracking this as closely, everything Kyle just said is a pretty striking reality. So we went for 20 years from 2007 to 2023 with something like 0.5% or less electricity growth annually in the US. And in 2024, that 5x. So we had something more like 2.5% growth, sometimes 3% growth, or by some measures 3% growth. Ethan can correct me on these figures. And it looks like 25 will be in that vein as well. And every projection shows for the next decade at least that we'll be back into significant growth mode. So that is being driven as the single largest contributor by new data center load coming in around the country. Although I should note industrial electrification is a major driver as well. And so we also have members in the heavy industry and advanced manufacturing segments, folks like Micron, that are putting in new semiconductor fabs around this country that are often the same size as those large data centers and are obviously very much tied up in that same conversation. So what does all this mean for load growth? So I think we'll see something on the order of 100 gigawatts of new load growth from data centers by the early 2030s. That's not the 500 gigawatts that are in interconnect queues, that are in load connecting queues around the country. The vast majority of that is speculative activity. The vast majority of that are people looking to get places in line that other people will come and occupy in the future. But we think something like 100 gigawatts is sort of real growth in that system. And probably another 50 gigawatts of growth will be on top of that from everything else, from industrial electrification and very modest vehicle electrification and residential electrification and all that. And that's 150 gigawatts of net new load we'll have to serve, even at the same time that we're retiring a lot of firm capacity around this country. So it's quite a challenge to build enough electricity to keep up with all that. To your very last point about affordability, I think the key things now are we going to reform our permitting systems at the federal level and in the states and the regions and the power markets so we can actually build the new generation and all the transmission infrastructure fast enough to meet that demand? And can we find models to make sure that all of this happens equitably around the country so that folks like our members pay their fair share, or I would argue in some cases more than their fair share, for all of that new transmission infrastructure and gear and all that that's going in without putting undue burden on residential ratepayers around the country. We actually see already some of the places in the country that have the very deepest data center build, so places like Virginia that have some of the lowest power rates in the country, and that has a lot to do with very, very large rate bases like data centers being able to sort of share the costs for all those transmission upgrades and last mile wires. So I think done well, this can actually be a really good news story for affordability. We are going to have to make sure that it's done well around the country as we do this big build out.
So as much as AI is sort of a draw on electricity and on this demand and the need for load growth, can it also provide solutions in that race to make electricity affordable and reliable for people?
Well, so absolutely, if you're distributing your fixed grid costs across more data centers, that can absolutely help, one. Two, a lot of these folks can bring flexibility to grids that sometimes can limit the need for new peaking generation capacity. So if your data center could come and it can agree to ramp its utilization down a couple of hours a year, or put in energy storage on site so that it can use that for a couple of hours a year, or pay for other people in the grid to do flexibility in their systems a couple hours a year, you can avoid the need for a lot of the expensive new generation. Also can help a lot. And then I think we're only scratching the surface of the incredible things that AI itself is going to be able to do to optimize the structure and functioning of our existing grid. There are already really interesting early stage deployments in two of our biggest power grids in this country, in both PJM and in MISO. They're using AI-enabled services, respectively Tapestry and Pearl Street, to optimize their interconnect processes and to just run their grids far more efficiently than they have already. So I think we're only at the beginning stages of how much more we can get out of the grid we have today.
Thank you. Rick, you're the CEO of the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation. There was some discussion of FESI in the prior panel. You're also someone with experience incubating new energy technology companies. Can you tell us a little bit about what FESI's role can be in bringing new technologies to the market that could help meet this expected load growth, or load growth that's already underway?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks so much, and thanks to the C3 team and everybody for having us here. I am so excited for this new foundation, right? We're the 13th agency-related nonprofit foundation, so there's 12 other of these types of organizations, but we are really the philanthropic partner of the Department of Energy. My lawyers make me say the independent agency-related nonprofit foundation, I think is what the lawyers say. It's great marketing tool, by the way. Like, everybody knows exactly what that means when I say it. Some of the other foundations across the board that you've seen are like FNIH, who's done biomarker consortiums, as well as Operation Warp Speed in the first Trump administration. InQtel, which commercializes early stage technologies for the CIA. And so there's a very clearly worn path for the work that we can do as an organization. The way that I am kind of thinking about it, and I love new things that happen. So I was watching a documentary on Lewis and Clark recently, and they kept saying throughout the thing, they're on a mission from Congress. And I very much see that as our organization, that we are on a mission from Congress to be able to help industry work with the Department of Energy in many ways, and be able to do it faster, better, and better for the country, and be able to have this kind of big picture framework for the United States and how we're going to deploy energy technologies, how we're going to meet the needs of ratepayers and industry from that standpoint. So as I'm thinking about our strategic priorities, mind you, I'm in month 5 here. I just moved from Ohio, the great state of Ohio, I believe is what I'm supposed to.
Your lawyers told you to say that.
Yeah, my lawyers told me to say that. Also, sometimes I like to call it the foundation. I had to borrow that from the Ohio State University. But with that said, so the way I'm thinking about projects and the work that we do is really around speed, scale, and stability. So first off, speed. What can we pilot as an organization rapidly to create tools that help us meet these needs? So when I look at speed of government, and I think everybody's talked about like government moves too slow. In some ways, government moves too slow purposefully, which is a good thing in many ways. But we, as an independent agency-related nonprofit foundation, see, I can say it faster every single time, really have an opportunity to create these small pilots and then decide if we're going to scale them in the house or find other partners externally to scale them. So one of the things that we're thinking about and looking at overall, anybody tried to work with the national labs? Ever? It's super easy. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but part of the mission from Congress, and I won't make a Blues Brothers reference, I swear, because sometimes I think we're on a mission from God too. But part of that mission is around the national labs and being able to help industry work better and faster with them. Helion recently, said they're going to do this lab donation program, and we're trying to figure out how do we just donate money or equipment to a national lab and have it be multi-purpose and multi-use by industry. That's been hard for them to be able to figure out. So that's an area that we're looking at and seeing if we can partner with NREL Foundation, which is Foundation for their national lab, or NREL has a new name, and I don't remember it right now. But
Rockies.
Pardon? Rockies?
The National Laboratory of the Rockies.
Laboratory of the Rockies.
Yes.
Thank you, Rich.
Yep.
So that's kind of that area that we're looking in, seeing how we can do that for all the national labs and make a donation process that works faster. So speed, scale, being able to do things big once we figure it out, and stability is kind of the last area that is really, 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 really important. I am not a political appointee. To be very, very clear. But as an organization, we're very fortunate to have the Secretary of Energy, the Undersecretary of Science, the Undersecretary of NNSA, and the Chief Commercialization Officer of Department of Energy on our board, and serving on the board as an ex officio member. So as I'm thinking about things that we do as an organization, and while I'm taking feedback from industry on the things that they would like to see, I like to think on a decade. What does industry want to do for the next decade in energy? That is beyond a political cycle, right? And making sure that we can amass capital at scale that will last longer than 4 years. And so that's kind of where we're approaching this area, is around speed, scale, and stability as an organization, and making sure that we are a good partner to industry to be able to enable the federal government to do great work that furthers the future of the United States energy infrastructure.
Thank you. Mike Catanzaro, CEO of CGCN. I think of you and your firm as having a real pulse, a finger on the pulse of Congress and the administration on these issues. We're heading towards a big move to the end of the year, as we heard in a prior panel today with Representatives Malloy and Pfluger on permitting reform. What are the permitting reform bills that you think are particularly crucial to ensuring we have energy for AI, and what do you think are the prospects for these bills?
Well, it's great to be here. It's awesome to be on this panel, and thanks to C3. I have talked about permitting reform ad nauseum, as some of you in this room have heard me talk about it. Rich made fun of me as we walked in here. Talking about permitting reform all the time. But
We kid because we love.
That's
It's
right.
good.
That's
We
good
kid
because we love.
Yeah.
We love permitting
Yeah.
reform.
Yeah.
We desperately need
We love your
permitting
focus.
That's
Yeah.
right. You talk about mission from Congress. We need to be on a mission from Congress to implement real, meaningful, sustainable permitting reforms. You talk about, sustaining capital for more than 4 years. We need a permitting regime that can be sustained for more than 4 years. I think the problem that we faced in this country is that you have what's commonly referred to as the pendulum swing from one Republican administration to a Democratic administration back to a Republican. The rules are constantly changing, and given that we're talking about these long-lived assets, particularly with the grid, building new power plants, building new generation capacity, building transmission lines, you got to know what the rules of the game are. Because if you start making the investments and you start getting your permits, then inevitably you're going to, for these big infrastructure projects, you're going to get litigated, you're going to get stuck in court, and then the next thing you know, you have a new administration on your hands, and they either take your permit away or they change the terms of your permit. We can't have that anymore, given the scale of what Rich was talking about. Even if that's half off, we still have a huge challenge ahead of us. So we absolutely need legislation to get passed so that, again, for the long haul, we'll have these rules enshrined in place. I think you're seeing in the Hill a couple of things emerge. One is, I mentioned transmission. I think there will be a transmission component to whatever emerges in the permitting reform discussion, but I raise that only because that's not really permitting reform in terms of what's being talked about. They're talking about transmission policy changes in terms of how you allocate the costs to customers in building transmission lines. But actual permitting reforms will certainly help build transmission lines as well. But the trade will be for something probably, hopefully, very substantial on the other side of that. So we're talking about the National Environmental Policy Act, which hopefully will be on the floor this week. I think they're struggling to deal with some last-minute concerns from some members on the Republican side of the Freedom Caucus. The House also passed The Permit Act, which I think is hugely significant because it deals with real fundamental changes to the Clean Water Act, particularly Sections 401 and Sections 404, which have been the bane of interstate pipeline developers, among others. And there was a bill also that passed last week that dealt with the coordination around the certificate reviews before FERC for interstate natural gas pipelines. So some of these things are, again, members are starting to get their heads around how significant this challenge is. And I think on both sides of the aisle, there is a recognition that we have to have legislation. I don't think it's going to emerge here in the next week or 2 weeks before the end of the year. I think this will slip into next year. Probably you could see something on the highway bill. But my hope would be that if Congress does anything at all on permitting reform, it would be that they address the litigation problem, the frivolous litigation that we all see day in and day out stopping these projects. Certainly people should have their day in court if they are about to suffer some economic harm due to a project being built near their land, or if they have a bed and breakfast or anything like that. But if you're talking about these sort of airy, abstract concerns that activist groups bring to courts and then enables them to stop these projects for months and years at a time. If Congress could do one thing and stop that and do nothing else, it would go a long way to, again, allowing us to build out the infrastructure we need. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful we can get this done.
Rich, SEBA and its members have a lot at stake in this activity too. What are you seeing? What are you expecting?
So just as Mike said, we are very excited about and supportive of the legislation that is currently moving through, and we're everyone, fingers and toes crossed, good vibes, going to our friends in Congress, whipping this tonight, trying to make this happen, and hoping we can get something through rules and for a good vote on the floor this week, which obviously just begins the process, and then it will go to our friends in the Senate to carry forward. We do think that there's a tremendous opportunity in this, and that can cross everything that Mike just mentioned, across greater certainty, greater clarity, much tighter timelines. Many folks are aware that there are these massive queues for new generation lined up around the country. There are now increasingly also massive queues for new loads, so our demand centers coming into the grid around the country. Some of those do have to do with the way the power markets have been running around the country, but a lot of what is driving that queue behavior are also just simple delays in the permits. We even have projects sometimes getting through queues that then can't actually build because they don't have their final permits in many cases. So if we're going to do anything like meeting this surge of demand, reforming this set of processes from the federal side down and greatly shrinking the length of follow-on adjudications and ability to challenge permits once they're issued is extremely important. I also think very important to note is that in committee in quite a bipartisan way in the House this time around, I think the bills were even improved by adding additional language which creates more certainty, so that once someone has received their permit already or they're deep in the permitting process, there's less chance of any given administration on any kind of energy project changing the rules of the game on that. So offering additional certainty to project developers and off-takers like us and investors that are underwriting all of it. So I think it'll be a very strong step in the right direction with all this. The very last thing I'll say, though, is I do think we have to get out of the mindset that we're going to get just one great big permitting bill done ever. I think this will be a good beginning to a process of reforming permitting, but I hope that over time we'll be able to go even further with all this in the future.
Rich, I'm going to stay with you here to move from the federal level to the state level. States have taken very different approaches to data center development. Some have used streamlined permitting. Others have used new energy sourcing mandates. As federal policy evolves, what combination of state and federal actions would most effectively align state and federal goals and provide the quick access to electricity infrastructure that the industry needs?
We're in a really interesting moment on this right now, and I'll be really interested to hear how Mike addresses this and thinks about the relative roles of the feds and the states. We're also under a bit of I think it might be fair to say, a tussle between the role of the federal government and the state government with the with the Department of Energy's new ANOPR proposal around large load interconnects around the country. So who will be in the driver's seat? Will it be individual states or public utility commissions in the driver's seat about the way a very large load connection like a data center, or will there be a uniform, federal regime, or at least for certain very large, arguably systemically important loads like very large AI data centers coming into the system? I think we're starting to see some really interesting innovation in a lot of those places. As I mentioned before, a huge portion of the things that have requested interconnects around the country are, I would argue, speculative requests. And so that can often gum up the works for the folks that, are actually have chips secured, actually have developed a data center in the past, actually know directly how they're going to use it. And so any reform that starts to frankly raise the requirements, raise the bar to entry, so that only serious players can come in and bring realistic new loads into those systems, and so that process isn't gummed up in the same way that the generation interconnect queues have been gummed up, again, by a lot of speculative folks coming in and requesting connection in that, are generally net good. And so that's taken many different forms in many different places. In some cases, the fee to do an interconnect has been increased. This is often called a large load tariff, or the beginnings of a large load tariff in many places. In other places, folks are requiring take or pay contracts, and so you're basically signing up and saying, well, I'm going to be on the hook to pay at least X amount of the cost of this generation interconnect, whether I bring the load in at all. That also, in some cases, seems to have cleared up or at least decreased the pressure. You've actually seen load queues shrink significantly in places that have brought that in, and maybe we're getting a more realistic picture of what's coming in. In other places, we're seeing really interesting new mechanisms that allow our members to bring their own new generating capacity with them into those grids. And so these are called sort of bring your own capacity agreements. I see Charles right here from Amazon in the front row. They just worked out an interesting bring your own capacity deal in Indiana with major new load that they're adding to that system and bringing new capacity along with it. Our friends at Meta and Google and many other places are working on these to bring their own capacity into those systems, to sort of guarantee that capacity will be there to serve and that you won't see price increases on all the other ratepayers in the system. The last thing, going back to that point about flexibility, in many cases you have grid operators who are saying, well, if you can be a little flexible when you bring that load into the system, if you don't need there are 8,760 hours in a year. That's 24 times 365. If you can make do with 8,700 hours in a year, we'll let you connect your load a lot faster into the system, and you figure out what to do for those other 60 hours of the year. So there's a lot of innovation happening in states and power markets around the country.
Mike, did you want to talk on that as well?
Yeah, this is, no, it's, Rich is right that there is a bit of a tussle going on, and you certainly saw that in the reaction to the DOE ANOPR. Certainly in the ANOPR, DOE was very clear, and in fact, they had it in italics, is we at the feds are not trying to come in and to tell you states, we're trying to take away your authority over rates or other parts of the grid that you have long enjoyed. That is not what we're trying to do here. I think NAGRUC had a slightly different view of that, but we'll see if they can sort of reach, a place of rapprochement here. But I think, at least from the administration perspective, and I certainly am not speaking for the administration, but I think Rich made some really important points in terms of what the administration wants to see out of what's going on right now. And Rich talks about a lot of the innovation occurring in the marketplace. I get the sense that the administration does not want to really get in the way of that. Yes, there's this federal state question. It's a deeply rooted question. It's a constitutional question. It is a policy question. But in terms of the things Rich is talking about, I think the administration, at the end of the day, and you may see this down the road, is, they want to issue some principles. They want to provide guidance for the industry. They want to get government out of the way. Where rules need to be clarified, they will clarify them. But at the end of the day, they know that this is a market-driven phenomenon that is occurring here. This is not, sending a man to the moon, which was really government-directed, and government, sat down in a room and figured it out. Like, that's not what's happening here. This is, again, a private sector market phenomenon. And so they want to make sure that they're allowing it to continue to flow and grow and expand and innovate and not have the government get in the way of that. So again, the federal state question is a very important one, but I think from the Fed's perspective, hopefully the states will understand that I don't think this administration is thinking about coming in and big-footing them in some way. Now, look, I understand the president just issued an executive order talking about preempting, state rules with respect to AI, and we'll see where all that goes. But I think on sort of the electric side of things, where you're thinking about DOE and FERC, at least that's how I think they're thinking about it.
I mean, is this one of these areas where some people are saying, boy, we really need FERC to do a whole new regime now, as soon as possible? Or is this an area where there's still a little innovation that could be done, that we should let people try a few different things before we sort of codify a new set of rules that overturn existing? What's the urgency here? Or should we have regulatory innovation for a while? Is that such a thing?
Well, from my seat, I do everything I can to not comment on current policy.
Fair enough.
As the stable, long-term foundation of the Department of Energy. With that said, recently we hosted a roundtable for Secretary Wright with AI companies. We also just recently did it with a lot of fusion companies, and it's really a mechanism that we're using to take feedback. The AI one really led to a lot of the findings, and that came out in Project Genesis and that work. And so, I think the thing that I think about overall, and it's important to note, is AI isn't the only driver of this. I think as a country, we see the need for reindustrialization. And so that electric use is going to increase as we see an opportunity for the United States to start making things again and building things again. So yes, we have an urgent issue at hand right now that we need to address in a meaningful way, and that's going to create change. And then change means opportunity in many ways. And so I think as a country, we have a huge opportunity to regain our manufacturing capacity and capability by utilizing AI. And utilizing this kind of issue that the market has created and be able to do some new and exciting things, as a country but I'm not going to comment directly.
Yeah.
FERC or the Department of Energy or anything like that.
You're good. You're listening to your lawyers. It's very
in my lane.
Well, so let me ask you. So, what do you see out there when people are talking about technologies that are going to help close this gap between the demand and the supply? What do you see about sort of new solutions, thinking advanced nuclear, microgrids, hydrogen-capable turbines, versus sort of, currently available solar storage, natural gas?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so tell me about, tell us about what are the newer technologies are close to being deployed at scale.
Yeah, well, I mean,
and what is the role of FESI in sort of closing that gap?
Yeah, well, I'll start and end, I think, with that part. So one of the areas that I think that the foundation plays a unique role is really being the external innovation partner of the Department of Energy. So the things that we're looking at right now are, how do we help the Office of Technology Commercialization and Office of Science look at the SBIR programs, look at the LEAP programs, look at all these cool commercialization programs that have moved forward over the years. But really to hit scale and to be in the proper role, it does need an independent agency-related partner. And so that's some of the areas, in the very short term, from a funding standpoint, and the work that we're going to do is how do you commercialize all these energy technologies that are either coming out of government or helping companies that are in the private sector that have a great idea and they just need a little bit of non-dilutive capital to move forward. Really, really, really important role. And we've seen some of the greatest technologies this country has ever created, which are currently being deployed in China and everywhere else, come from the national labs, come from the SBIR program, STTR programs. And so that's really a short-term area that we're looking as something that we can do to be a part of that. When it comes to what's happening on the grid and the space, one of the things that I think is really important that we look at as a country, and I think we're looking at it, but maybe not taking it as seriously because it's just not sexy. Grid is sexy, right? In general, I mean, I think everybody can agree it's so cool. Really
Yes.
sexy.
Yeah.
Strong support from this panel.
Strong support from this panel. And then like to make it even sexier, let's just like lay some power lines where they were and do some reconductoring.
Wow.
Really get you up in the morning, right? So that's one of the areas that I think is super interesting and super important is like how do we like actually look at the grid as it is now, and how can we increase our capacity or available electrons rapidly? And so what are we doing in reconductoring? And I think EDF was on the panel before us, and I think there's some really cool roles that they can play. But at the end of the day, it actually comes down to like incentives for utilities to be able to do this. And like, what are those mechanisms that I think people smarter than me and people that have a really clear policy role need to like really be thinking about, because that's an area where we can just increase capacity rapidly, or at least use rapidly, and we just have to lay some lines on some lines, and we don't really have to worry too much about a lot of permitting from that standpoint. And so like that's, in a lot of the areas, you think of like, fusion's going to solve this problem, or geothermal's going to solve this problem, or there's all these really cool, exciting things that like we can all, appreciate and love and all of that great stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, what can we do now that's going to like move this forward in a meaningful way? And so like that's kind of the first part that I think of. I mentioned we did this fusion roundtable, and I would say it's palpable that industry is very, very, very real, and is looking to move rapidly. I think historically, I think fusion and nuclear in general has been politicized as an independent agency-related nonprofit foundation that is bipartisan or nonpartisan, if you will. Like, I think getting politics out of energy is super, super important as we think and move forward. And so really looking at, what are the technologies that science says is going to work is really, really important as a country overall. And so I'm excited really about fusion. I'm excited about geothermal. I'm excited that fission deployments are happening and small modular reactors. I mean, this is all great stuff. But what we have to see is like, what are the financing mechanisms? Like, what is step from SBIR and early stage venture capital into scale, right? And as I go back to speed, scale, and stability for our foundation, scale is super, super important. And that's what we need to actually solve some of these problems.
Rich, some of your members that are hyperscalers are playing an interesting role in sort of funding these technologies to get them deployed, whether it's order books for advanced nuclear or to taking equity positions in Fervo, et cetera. Why are they doing this, and what are the ways that we can expect that this will be meaningful?
It's really exciting, especially for me coming out of my amazing alma mater, ClearPath, and my upgraded ClearPath. Jeremy Harrell, I think, was on stage earlier today. So these technologies that I, along with C3 and our friends over at Clean Econ, and lots of people in this room have now worked on for years getting these things advanced. Power purchase agreements are now very real. Big equity rounds in these companies are very real. And that's just incredibly exciting. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's being driven by the size of the expansion in all of this. So, if you're a big company and you're committed to powering clean, but you're bringing let's say you're bringing a 2 gigawatt data center to somewhere like Northeast Louisiana, that would be 8 gigawatts of new solar in that region, right? Because of the capacity factor of that resource. And then if you were trying to actually supply that data center with that solar, not just annually match the output, but actually supply it, it would be that 8 gigawatts plus even more because of the seasonal variation of the solar, plus a fabulous amount of batteries behind all that. And so you really start to get to the limits of what you could do to supply a very large load with a solely intermittent technology approach. And so it's brought in all of these new denser technologies that run 24/7, and so these are kind of being called clean firm now as a category, and that's everything you mentioned: nuclear and advanced fission, existing fission, fusion, hydropower, geothermal, long-duration energy storage, continuing use of thermal resources like gas and coal and biomass with carbon capture, all those things. And I think now our companies have contracted for virtually every one of those resources, up to and including fusion. Some of them are very large-scale procurements. I keep Charles, unfortunately, is sitting right in front of me here, so I keep coming back to Amazon. But our friends at X Energy are also in the room, and so Amazon has made a massive procurement commitment for X Energy advanced reactor companies. This is high-temperature gas reactors in close partnership with the Department of Energy. They're one of the recipients of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program Awards. And Amazon's kind of done a whole series of things. So equity investment into the company alongside, I think, Michael Bruce was up here earlier as well, alongside a number of private investors, in addition to the DOE, plus near-term power purchase agreement commitments at very specific sites to deploy the technology, plus a long-term kind of order book building purchasing commitment of 5 gigawatts of that reactor, which is really kind of a market-making move for something like an early-stage advanced reactor company. And so we are hopeful collectively as a community that we can pull forward all these. Just earlier this week, we published or was it last week? Susan Bueller over there is going to kill me. Last week, we published our first roundup of all the clean firm procurements that our companies have done over the course of this year. And in the first half of this year, we did 3.7 gigawatts of clean firm procurement. Compare that to about 23 total gigawatts in 24 of all the procurements we did. But the clean firm, again, because it has those higher capacity factors, when you look at the generation coming out of that, it's a huge amount of generation that we're contracting for with these. And I just expect that will continue to increase. The most recent one, it's not even included in those numbers, it was a Q4 deal. Our friends at Google did their first procurement with a gas with CCS plant. So that breaks open that technology category for our members as well. It's a plant in Illinois from Low Carbon Industries that'll do, I think, about 400 megawatts of gas, but with carbon capture attached in those wells. So it's a really exciting growing area for us.
Well, terrific. So I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. You obviously have a very engaged and knowledgeable panel here. Yes, Bob Stout.
Hello, this has been a great panel. You know you're in a group with energy wonks when there's broad agreement that the grid is sexy. That was a moment. And you guys are all sexy in this talk. And I'm going to bring it to my favorite sexy topic, which is methane. So what I wanted to ask you about, the Natural Gas Innovation Network, our coalition, is very interested in how we can use the demand for AI, and in particular on the buyer side, to catalyze a lot of these innovations. Congressman Fluger was here earlier and talked about the fact that he took somebody internationally out to the oil patch, and they saw how all of these innovations are finding these emissions, driving them down, and they're emissions of gas. So it's also great for affordability and abundance and all those things. But I'm interested in your thoughts about whether the AI, they want molecules, they want electrons now above all, but they also are interested in clean. So I'm interested in your thoughts on whether that could be something that could help catalyze the continued growth of the innovation in cleaner, differentiated natural gas. Thanks.
I'm happy to start really quickly. So if you, just to go back to that deal I was just talking about, the CCS deal, if you look, Google has published the terms under which it will do gas with CCS, and there's 4 big requirements in their terms. 1, they'll do gas if it has CCS on it, so it's got to have a reasonably high capacity factor. 2, the stuff that they don't capture at the point of combustion, they're going to pull back out of the air with carbon dioxide removal technologies. 3, they don't want the CO2 going to EOR. Personally, I think EOR is a wonderful use for that CO2 because it makes a lower carbon barrel of oil, but that's in their principles. And 4, they say that the methane going into that plant is going to have to be differentiated, right? It's going to have to be low emissions methane going into that plant. Now, they haven't yet settled on specific certification or specific leakage rate or all that. I think that's the process they'll go through over the next couple of years before that plant is kind of up and running. But I think that's an early demand signal in that space. And I think over time that could grow quite a bit as more and more of these CCS plants come up. Just for reference, right now the market for all these clean energy technologies, if you take all the PPAs together, it's between a $25 and a $40 billion market annually, which is sort of, probably 2 orders of magnitude right now, bigger than the sort of the premium market that's being demanded for differentiated methane. So I do think that once these two things start to come together, there's going to be a real opportunity for people to actually see some real market upside, beyond just the compliance markets for those Wagyu molecules, as I've heard people. These special. That's a first.
Just keep getting sexier.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, really. Yeah.
Here, here.
Yeah, and I'll jump in real quick. I grew up on the Marcellus Shale, so that's where I'm from, what part of the country. And the one thing that I will say more than anything is, the natural gas industry in general has innovated more than almost any industry that I've ever seen, and specifically to that point. And so, as we're moving forward and the work that we're doing, I'm expecting really, really, really big things from that industry on being able to participate in this kind of next new thing that's happening. And I think we see very clearly, especially from the driller side, the geothermal space was learned from the natural gas industry, and seeing how they can play and participate and work together and build on that, on their current industry and the new industry that's coming from that is super important. So I think there's a clear role, and it's a very, very important role, and they're the most innovative people in the world as far as I'm concerned.
Any other questions? Right here, yes.
Hey, it's Ethan again with another quick one for you, but really for Rich and Michael, how concerned are you about AI backlash? We've already seen 2 elections in which higher retail electricity prices became a major issue. Democrats are certainly are now targeting certain utilities and ISOs. Even Governor DeSantis has voiced some hostility towards AI. How concerned are you that the public at the moment is not feeling any of the benefits of AI, but is seeing some of the costs in terms of higher energy prices?
It greatly concerns me. You're seeing the backlash occur in red areas, in red parts of the country too, where you might think they would be a little bit more amenable to, more open to the development. Chandler, Arizona is a pretty good case. If you want a case study in what's happening right now in terms of activists and just ordinary people on actually both sides of the aisle coming together and laying out sort of the parade of horribles as to why data centers should be blocked. Just go to Chandler, but you can go to Georgia, you can go up to Pennsylvania and Montour County. The left and right were, I think, singing Woody Guthrie songs together and taking AI jargon and putting it, replacing out the Woody Guthrie. So seriously, but that's what's going. And then you mentioned Governor DeSantis. So and you see what's happening there in these places all over the country now. And I think that was part of the reason the administration and the president felt the need to put that statement out in the form of an executive order calling for preemption of AI regulation. We'll see how that plays out from a legal and policy standpoint. Some say that it could be on dubious grounds, but we'll see how that again plays out if there's litigation, if the DOJ decides to file lawsuits against individual states. I don't know if that kind of thing will help with the backlash. It may actually compound it and exacerbate it. As far as I'm concerned, if you're thinking about preemption, if you look at how the preemption debates over many years have played out, and you can think about the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Natural Gas Act, the Federal Power Act. There was a sort of bottom-up consensus that these things needed to happen. It was good for the country, talking about interstate concerns. I think you could get there with AI, but again, on the ground, I think there's going to have to be a very concerted campaign in terms of developers and those who want this to happen to address, I think, legitimate concerns that we're hearing from people on the ground about noise, about water use, about lack of jobs. Again, I'm not saying I buy these things, but these are the types of things that people are talking about. And so those have to be addressed and people's concern has to be assuaged, or else I think we have a very serious problem, no matter what happens at the federal level, if this isn't addressed right now.
I agree with Mike. It's a real problem. Went home to my hometown, Scranton, Pennsylvania, over Thanksgiving, and opposition to the local data center plants was above the fold in the Scranton Times. It was on the front page. And boy, it's from some communities around Scranton that could desperately use the economic opportunity of a data center, and yet people had all these concerns. They had concerns about the water, they had concerns about the noise, and so this is clearly something where there's going to have to be a lot more education for the communities that these are coming into, particularly on the various impacts. I think people are going to have to see and believe that their power bills are not being impacted in all this, and so I think the community is going to have to do a better job messaging around that and sort of proving out the case that it's not them, it's other things that are happening, or actually show how the impact of these data centers is actually bringing down the costs of electricity in many of these communities. So it's definitely a very real thing that our broader community is gonna have to confront here.
Yeah, and I'll jump in with probably the last thing that I'll say in general, but one of the things I look back on, we didn't say at the beginning of my career, but I spent 8 years as a U.S. Army infantryman. Right now, if we look at the rest of the world, we're in very real danger of ceding being the technological leader in the world. Like, this is very real. Some people say we're 10 years behind China and other countries right now as it is. I woke up every day saying the infantryman's creed, and one of my favorite parts of that was, in the race for victory, we are swift, determined, and courageous, armed with a fierce will to win. And all of those are very, very, very real concerns that we need to address. But as a country, we need a fierce will to win, to maintain being the technological leader of the world, and to hold our place there. So that's my closing statement.
That seems like a wonderful way to close. Thank you, Rick. That's very good. Will you please join me in thanking these folks for their insights and knowledge?